Slavery. Is there still such a horrendous thing or practice where human beings are deprived of their basic dignity and freedoms? I am Dr. Rodel Aguas. This is our series on American government. In this lesson, we will discuss the 13th Amendment. One of the causes of the American Civil War was the issue on the institution of slavery. The southern states' agricultural economy relied on slavery for farm labor, while the northern states' industrial economy mostly did not have the need for slaves in their factories. In addition, the abolitionist movement in the northern states believed that the treatment of human beings as properties is inherently immoral and therefore evil. They campaigned to make slavery illegal throughout the United States. The southern states feared that this will negatively affect their economy and their way of life. When Abraham Lincoln, the presidential candidate of the anti-slavery Republican Party, won the presidential elections, 11 southern states started to secede or break away from the United States, forming the Confederate States of America. The rebel nation was composed of the following states: South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, North Carolina, Virginia, Alabama, and Tennessee. Using his war powers under Article 2, Section 2 of the United States Constitution, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863. This proclamation provided for the abolition of slavery in the southern states, which were at war with the United States of America. President Lincoln used this as a military strategy to weaken the economy of the southern states, which relied heavily on the abundant free labor from the African slaves. However, the Emancipation Proclamation was silent on the abolition of slavery in the northern states. This raised political questions on the fairness and validity of this proclamation. To settle the political issues that may divide the Union on the validity of the proclamation, Congress passed the 13th Amendment, which declared that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Formally abolishing slavery all over the United States, the 13th Amendment was passed by Congress on January 31st, 1865 and ratified by all the states on December 6, 1865. In addition to granting freedom to all slaves in the United States, the 13th Amendment nullified or declared null and void or illegal the following laws. First, Fugitive Slave Acts. These were a pair of federal laws that allowed local governments to capture and return runaway slaves within the United States. Harsh punishments were added against anyone who interferes in the capture of runaway slaves. Second, Three-Fifths Compromise. It was adopted on July 12, 1787 for the purpose of counting population. Slaves were only counted as 3/5 of a person. If slaves were regarded as 3/5 of a person, they were being regarded not as human beings, but as properties with some characteristics of a human being. What is slavery and involuntary servitude in the 13th Amendment? Slavery is the state of being under the control of someone, where a person is forced to work as a property of another who purchases them or owns them from their birth. In slavery, the slave does not have a right to leave the owner or not work for them. Involuntary servitude, on the other hand, is a condition of compulsory service or labor performed by one person against his will for the benefit of another person due to force, threats, intimidation, or other similar means of coercion and compulsion directed against him. If a person willingly begins work but later desires to withdraw and is then forced to remain and perform work against his will, his service becomes involuntary. Also, whether a person is paid a salary or a wage is not determinative of the question as to whether that person has been held in involuntary servitude. In other words, if a person is forced to labor against his will, his service is involuntary even though he is paid for his work. In the 13th Amendment, we find an exception clause. In these words, except as punishment for a crime. Forced labor is a common trait of slavery and involuntary servitude. While the 13th Amendment made slavery and involuntary servitude illegal in the United States, it allowed an exception to the rule. A person convicted of a crime can legally be subjected to forced labor, which was later renamed hard labor, according to this amendment. Legal scholars, civil rights activists, and prisoners have criticized the exception clause in the 13th Amendment as a new form of slavery. After a brief progress of the Reconstruction period, which attempted to secure the rights of freed slaves as American citizens, African Americans found themselves facing a new form of slavery and oppression. Some southern states created a judicial system that strategically placed African Americans in prison to work once again in plantations against their will and with no pay for many decades after the Civil War. States put prisoners to work through a practice called convict leasing, whereby white planters and industrialists leased prisoners to work for them. States and private businesses made money doing this, but prisoners did not. Today, states and private companies still rely on prisoners performing free or extremely low-paid labor for them. Decades of prison and civil rights activism have sought to improve conditions and pay for incarcerated workers. The fight for the abolition of slavery and involuntary servitude goes on.